The night Elowen discovered the truth, she was supposed to be sleeping. Instead, she was in her chambers, reading forbidden books, something she'd been doing in secret for months. The text was old, written in a language that predated the current Fae courts, and it spoke of things that should never have been written down. It spoke of her mother's crime. She had maybe 30 minutes before the guards did their rounds. Maybe less. The letter she'd found hidden beneath a loose stone in the palace walls, sealed with magic that had only just broken down after decades of dormancy, had changed everything. Her entire life, everything she'd been told about her lineage, her purpose, her destiny. It was all a lie, constructed carefully, meticulously, by people she'd trusted completely. The letter was from her mother to the head counselor, and what it confessed made Elowen's hands shake so violently she could barely hold the ancient text. "I have done what you asked," the letter read. "The child is born. She carries the blood of the starborn exactly as the prophecy foretold, but I cannot do this anymore. I cannot raise her knowing what we plan to use her for. When she comes of age, when she is crowned, she will die. You've engineered an entire court system around her sacrifice. Forgive me, but I cannot watch my daughter become nothing but a fuel source for your immortality." Elowen's mother had disappeared 300 years ago. Everyone said she'd chosen to leave the court. Everyone said it was voluntary. Now Elowen understood. Her mother had run because she'd discovered the truth, and because she tried to protect her daughter. There was a sound outside her door. The soft footfall of a guard. Elowen shoved the letter and the ancient text beneath her pillow and climbed into bed, pulling the gossamer sheets up to her chin. She forced her breathing to slow, forced her magic to settle, forced herself to look like she'd been asleep for hours. The door opened silently. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, with the silver-blue coloring of the Starlight Court. It was Ethan, the captain of the Queen's Guard, the man who'd been her secret keeper since childhood, the man she'd trusted with her deepest fears, the man she'd been falling in love with. "You're awake," he said softly, and there was no surprise in his voice. As if he'd known exactly where she'd be, what she'd be doing. Elowen's heart began to race. "I couldn't sleep. Too much anticipation about tomorrow's coronation ceremony." He moved closer, and in the moonlight streaming through her windows, she could see his face clearly. Beautiful, familiar, and absolutely filled with something that looked like calculation. "That's a lie," Ethan said gently. "You've never been good at lying to me, Elowen. You found the letter, didn't you?" Time seemed to stop. The world contracted to just this moment. Her in bed, him standing over her. The truth finally exposed. "Who are you?" Elowen whispered. "Are you part of this? Were you sent to watch me? To make sure I didn't discover?" "I was sent to watch you," Ethan interrupted, and his voice held a note of something that might have been regret. "But not in the way you think." He knelt beside her bed, and his silver-blue eyes met hers with an intensity that made her chest ache. "I was sent by your mother. 30 years ago, she came to me before she disappeared and asked me to protect you, to keep you safe until you were old enough to understand what was happening, to ensure that when the truth emerged, you wouldn't be completely alone." Elowen felt tears burning her eyes. "My mother, she's alive?" "She's waiting for you," Ethan said. "But we need to leave. Now, before the coronation ceremony tomorrow, because if you go through with it, if you let them place that crown on your head, your magic will bind to theirs. And the moment the binding is complete, they will begin the ritual. They will drain you, slowly, over decades, using your power to extend their own lives. Your purpose was never to rule. You were born to be a sacrifice disguised as a queen." The words hit like physical blows. Everything suddenly made sense. The way the council had always watched her so carefully. The way they'd insisted she master every spell, harness every ounce of power. They weren't building a queen. They were building a battery. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" Elowen demanded, even as she was already reaching for her emergency bag beneath the bed. "How do I know this isn't another trap? That you're not lying to get me to run so they can hunt me like an escaped criminal?" "You don't," Ethan said simply. "You can only trust your instincts. and your instincts have been screaming at you for months that something is wrong. Your magic doesn't want to bind to the crown. That's why you've been having nightmares. That's why you've been reading forbidden texts. Your soul knows the truth, even if your mind is still trying to deny it. He was right. She had been having nightmares. Visions of herself screaming, power being ripped from her body, aging rapidly as her magic was consumed. She told herself they were just pre-coronation anxiety. But deep down, something in her had always known. My father, Elowen said suddenly. What about my father? Is he part of this? Ethan's expression darkened. Your father is the head counselor, Elowen. He's been orchestrating this plan for your entire life. The love, the attention, the training, it was all calculated. You were the perfect tool, powerful enough to extend their lives by centuries, trusting enough that you'd never suspect. The betrayal hit her like a physical weapon. Her father, the being she loved most in the world, had been lying to her since birth, using her, preparing her for destruction. We have to move, Ethan urged. The guards change shifts in 5 minutes. After that, the East Wing corridor will be empty for exactly 8 minutes. It's our only window. Elowen threw on her traveling cloak, dark gray to hide her silver blue hair and luminescent skin, and grabbed the emergency bag she'd been subconsciously preparing without even realizing it. Ethan led her through passages in the palace that she'd never known existed, through corridors that seemed to fold through space itself. They moved like ghosts, like shadows, like two people who knew that being caught would mean death. They were crossing through the lower gardens when she heard it, the sound of the alarm bells, the magical chiming that resonated through every stone of the palace. They'd been discovered. Faster, Ethan hissed, pulling her toward the veil, the boundary between the Fae realm and the mortal world. But before they could reach it, a figure materialized directly in front of them. It was her father. The head counselor stood in full ceremonial regalia, his crystalline form glowing with power. His face, which had always seemed kind and gentle to her, was now revealed as exactly what it had been all along, carefully constructed. A mask. Elowen, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command. You will come with me. You will cease this foolishness immediately. There was magic in his words. Compulsion magic, the kind that was supposed to override her will. But something had changed. The moment she'd learned the truth, some part of her had broken free of his control. She could feel the magic trying to grab hold of her, trying to force her obedience, but it slid off her like water from a stone. No, Elowen said, and her voice was steady. I won't. For a moment, her father looked genuinely shocked. Then his expression hardened, and the mask fell away completely. What remained was something dark, something old, something that had been waiting 3,000 years to show its true face. Then you've made your choice, he said coldly, and you've chosen against the entire court, against your family, against destiny itself. Do you know what you are, Elowen? Do you understand what your blood contains? He raised his hands, and power began to gather around him, not the soft, pure starlight magic of the court, but something older, something that tasted like ash and hunger, and the void itself. You carry the bloodline of the first fairy queen, the one who broke the original curse by sacrificing her immortality for love, and her power, that world-breaking, system-shattering power, flows in your veins. The council realized long ago that we couldn't control someone like you, so we decided to drain you instead, to harvest your power in controlled increments, to use you to rebuild the old magic of our ancestors. He took a step toward them. But if you won't cooperate, if you insist on being difficult, then we'll do it the hard way. We'll tear the power from your body by force. It might kill you, but your power will be ours. Ethan grabbed Elowen's hand and ran toward the veil. Her father's magic was already chasing them, tearing at the very fabric of reality to try to stop them. The veil was so close. 50 feet, 30, 10. They leaped through. The sensation was like being shattered and reformed. The crossing between worlds was never meant to happen this fast, this violently. Elowen felt her very essence being torn apart and reconstructed. She felt her magic screaming in protest. She felt Ethan's hand holding hers, the only anchor keeping her from being lost completely in the spaces between worlds. Then they fell through onto damp earth, gasping for breath. Beneath a moon that looked nothing like the moons in the Fae realm, they ran for hours through the mortal world. Elowen had never been there before. It was forbidden for the royal bloodline to venture into the human realm. Too dangerous, they said. Too unpredictable. Too full of beings who wouldn't understand our superiority. Now she understood why they'd kept her away. The mortal world was beautiful. It was real in a way the Fae realm never was. There was pain here, yes, and suffering, but there was also genuine joy, genuine connection, genuine choice. They finally stopped in an old cottage on the edge of a forest. It smelled of earth and old wood and things growing. Ethan bolted the door behind them and immediately began to check her for injuries from the crossing. "We need to bind your power," he said urgently. "If they can track you through your magical signature, they'll find us within hours." "How do we do that?" Elowen asked. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, like it was coming from very far away. Ethan pulled a set of ancient silver bracelets from a hidden compartment. "These were made by your mother. They'll mask your power, make you appear human to anyone scanning for you. It will hurt. Magic doesn't like to be suppressed, but it's the only way." He was right. When he clasped the first bracelet around her wrist, it felt like fire, like having part of herself ripped away and locked in a cage. She screamed, and Ethan held her, whispering apologies and explanations she couldn't quite process. "Your mother is 3 miles from here," he said when the worst had passed. "In an old safe house. She's been waiting for this moment for 300 years. 300 years? Elowen tried to process this. "But I'm only 217. Your mother's been alive for exactly 310 years, Ethan said. "And she's been preparing your escape for longer than that. She knew this was coming. She's always known." The woman in the safe house looked like Elowen, but aged. Her silver hair was streaked with white. Her luminescent skin had lost some of its glow. But her eyes were exactly the same as Elowen's own. "My daughter," she said, and she was crying. "My beautiful, brilliant daughter. You made it out." Elowen wanted to be angry, wanted to demand answers about why she'd been abandoned, why she'd never been told the truth. But instead, she collapsed into her mother's arms and cried harder than she'd ever cried in her entire life. Her mother held her while she broke apart, held her while the reality of her situation crashed down on her, held her while she grieved the life she'd lost, the father who'd been a lie, the future that had been orchestrated by people she'd trusted. When she finally had no more tears, her mother led her to a table where food was already waiting. Real food, mortal food, bread and cheese and fruit and things that had no magical enhancement whatsoever. "There's so much I need to tell you," her mother said. "About who you really are. About the prophecy that's been driving the council's actions for millennia. About the power that's locked inside you." "Tell me," Elowen said, because she needed to understand, needed to know the full scope of what they'd been planning. Her mother took a breath. "The first fairy queen made a bargain with something ancient. Something that existed before magic itself. She gave up her immortality to love a mortal man, and in doing so, she broke a contract that the courts had made with that ancient power. The courts have spent 3,000 years trying to undo what she did, trying to reverse the sacrifice. And they believed they could do it by draining your power, by combining your bloodline with theirs in a specific ritual." "Why my bloodline specifically?" Elowen asked. "Because you're the only direct descendant of that first queen who's ever been born with full power intact. All the others were diluted through generations. But you?" Her mother reached out and touched Elowen's cheek gently. "You were born with the complete power of the first queen. The power to break things, to remake things, to challenge the very structure of magic itself." The next 3 days were surreal. Elowen learned that her mother's name was Lisa, and that she'd been a member of the council once. She'd helped plan the ritual that would drain Elowen's power. She'd been completely willing to sacrifice her own daughter until the moment Elowen was born, and she looked into her eyes. "In that moment," Lisa said, "I understood what your ancestor understood. That love was stronger than magic. That sacrifice meant nothing if it was forced. I walked away from the council that night. I've been working ever since to protect you from their plans. She'd sent Ethan to watch over Elowen. She'd prepared the escape route. She'd waited, knowing that eventually Elowen would discover the truth and have to make a choice. But there's something else, Lisa said on the fourth day. Something the council doesn't know. The binding ritual they planned, it wouldn't have just drained your power. It would have awakened something else. Something sleeping inside you. What? Elowen asked. The consciousness of the first queen, Lissa said quietly. She's still in your blood, still watching. And if they'd activated the ritual, they would have woken her. And she would have been furious. Elowen felt something shift inside her at these words. It was like something that had been dormant was beginning to stir. She could almost feel it. Another presence, another voice, another consciousness that had been waiting in the depths of her magic. That night, Elowen couldn't sleep. She went outside into the mortal world's darkness, so different from the perpetual twilight of the Fae realm, and tried to reach out to that presence inside her. Are you there? She whispered to the night, and something answered. It wasn't words exactly, but understanding. Emotions and images flooding into her mind. She felt what the first queen had felt. The crushing weight of an immortal existence that had become meaningless. The desperate longing for something real, something mortal, something that could change and grow and ultimately end. The decision to give it all up for one perfect moment with someone she loved. And she also felt the queen's rage. Her fury at what the courts had become. Her horror at discovering that they'd been using her own bloodline as a tool for immortality. Her rage at the betrayal of everything she fought for. The first queen's consciousness had been waiting for this moment. Waiting for a descendant who could hear her. Waiting for the chance to finish what she'd started 3,000 years ago. And as Elowen opened herself to that presence, she understood what she had to do. The council came for her 3 days later. They'd tracked her through the mortal world using magic that transcended the boundary between realms. Ethan fought them, his power against theirs. He was magnificent and heartbreaking, giving everything to buy her time, but there were too many. Elowen watched from where she hid, watching Ethan fall to the council's power. She wanted to scream, wanted to run to him, but her mother held her back. If you reveal yourself now, it's over, Lissa whispered. This has to work. The plan has to work. The plan. The one Lissa had developed decades ago, knowing that eventually the council would find them. The ritual had to happen, but not on the council's terms. It had to happen in a place where Elowen could control it. A place where the first queen could fully awaken. The council dragged an unconscious Ethan back to the Fae realm. They were triumphant, thinking they'd recaptured their prize. They didn't know that Elowen had let them take him, that she'd planned this exact scenario. She stepped out of the shadows and walked directly toward the veil, toward the portal the council had left open. I'm ready, she said. I'll submit to your ritual. I'll let you bind my power. I'll give you what you want. The council was shocked. They'd expected resistance. They'd prepared for rebellion, but not for surrender. Her father looked almost relieved, almost like he believed her. That was his first mistake. The ritual chamber was even more beautiful and terrible than she remembered. The floor of solidified starlight, the rivers of magic flowing beneath, the ceiling open to the infinite stars. And in the center, a new platform. Not the coronation stone, but something older. Something designed specifically for the draining. They'd restrained Ethan to one side of the chamber. He was awake now, his eyes wide with understanding of what was happening. He tried to warn her, tried to tell her to run, but the council had silenced him with magic. Her father approached with the coronation crown, but now Elowen could see what it really was. Not a crown at all, but a binding mechanism. Ancient magic woven into a shape that looked beautiful and harmless. A cage designed to fit perfectly on a queen's head. Put it on, her father commanded. Elowen took the crown from his hands. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at her father, at the being who had raised her, trained her, loved her. Or rather, the being who had mimicked love so perfectly that she'd never suspected it was all calculated. I have one question before I do this, Elowen said. I need to understand. How could you do this to me? How could you carry me as a child and train me and pretend to love me, all while knowing you were preparing me for this? Her father's expression didn't change. Because duty matters more than individual desire. The court matters more than one person's happiness. The immortality of our kind matters more than your comfort. I did what was necessary. And in that moment, Elowen understood he wasn't lying. He genuinely believed this. He had rationalized his betrayal so thoroughly that he no longer saw it as betrayal at all. He saw it as duty. She raised the crown and placed it on her head. The binding magic activated immediately. Elowen felt it wrapping around her consciousness, trying to lock down her power, trying to begin the draining process. The council members raised their hands in unison, chanting in the ancient language, preparing to pull her magic into themselves. But they had no idea what they were actually activating. Inside Elowen, the First Queen's consciousness erupted into full wakefulness. Thousands of years of fury and power and accumulated rage suddenly had a vessel, suddenly had a purpose. Elowen's eyes began to glow, not with the soft silver light of the Starlight Court, but with a light that was older than the world, older than magic itself. A light that contained the concentrated power of 3,000 years of sacrifice and betrayal and broken promises. "You want my power?" Elowen's voice came out layered, her own voice mixed with another voice, deeper and more ancient. "Then, take it. Take it all." But instead of draining her power into themselves, the council members suddenly found themselves on their knees. Elowen was pulling their power out of them. Not her power, theirs. She was unraveling the immortality magic that had been keeping them alive for centuries. She was undoing the contracts they'd made with ancient forces. They screamed. The pain of having their immortality ripped away. The agony of suddenly feeling centuries of age catching up to them at once. The horror of realizing too late what they'd done and what it would cost them. Her father looked at her with something like recognition in his eyes. Like he was finally seeing his daughter, not as a tool, but as the terrifying power she'd always been. "Elowen," he started, but his voice was cracking. His crystalline form was beginning to fracture, but Elowen wasn't done. She turned to the magical bindings holding Ethan and shattered them with a gesture. He fell forward, gasping, but alive. Whole. Then she reached out to the entire realm, not just the Starlight Court, but all the Fae courts connected through the ancient magic network. She could feel them all. Thousands of beings of power and immortality, sustained by binding magic and ancient contracts, and she began to undo it all. Not destructively, not with malice, but with the same clarity that had driven the First Queen 3,000 years ago. Magic, as it should be, distributed, natural, free from the forced hierarchies that had corrupted it. It took hours. Hours of power flowing, magic rebalancing, the entire structure of Fae civilization shifting into something new. Some of the council members didn't survive the transition. Their bodies couldn't handle the sudden age, but others did. Some Fae accepted the change, some didn't. And when it was finally finished, Elowen removed the crown from her head and dropped it to the floor of solidified starlight, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. The world was silent. The magic had stopped flowing. The bindings that had held the Fae realms together for millennia had been severed. Ethan helped her to her feet. She was exhausted in a way she'd never experienced before. Not just physically, but magically. Her power was still there, still inside her, but it felt different. Calmer. More hers. "What happens now?" Ethan asked softly. Elowen looked around at the ruined chamber, at the council members who were aging rapidly, at the realm that would have to rebuild itself from the ground up. "Now," she said, "we choose what comes next. Not because we're forced to, not because of destiny or prophecy or ancient contracts, but because we want to." She reached out and took Ethan's hand, and they walked toward the veil together, toward the mortal world, toward a future that was finally truly theirs to create. Behind them, the Starlight Court began to transform. The rigid hierarchies crumbled. The immortality that had been forced upon the Fae unraveled and was replaced with something more fragile and beautiful. Life that could actually end. Magic that could actually be chosen. Freedom that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Her mother was waiting for them on the other side of the veil. Lissa looked younger somehow. The weight she'd been carrying for 300 years had lifted. "You did it," she said, holding her daughter close. You actually did it. You broke the entire system. The first queen broke it, Elowen corrected. I just finished what she started. They stood together in the mortal world, three broken people who'd managed to break one of the most powerful systems ever created. And as the sun rose over them, a real sun in a real world, not the artificial light of the Fae realm, Elowen felt something she'd never felt before: hope. In the days that followed, she learned that change was messy. Some Fae adapted to their new freedom beautifully. Others were destroyed by it, unable to handle a world without immortality and rigid structure. The courts began to dissolve and reorganize in ways that nobody could have predicted. But Ethan stayed with her through all of it, not as her guard, not as her servant, as her partner, as someone who'd chosen her not because of destiny or duty, but because he loved who she actually was. And Elowen began to understand what the first queen had understood 3,000 years ago: that the most powerful magic wasn't found in ancient rituals or inherited power or hierarchical structures. The most powerful magic was found in love, freely chosen, in sacrifice willingly made, in the decision to break everything that was broken and build something new in its place. She had been born to be a queen, but she became so much more. She became free.